Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about how to do some very basic harmony using things that we call the primary chords. Why are we doing this? Well, there are many composers out there who can write some kind of melody and then they're kind of scratching their heads thinking, oh no, I don't know which chords to put with this melody, or I'm trying things out and that doesn't sound too good and not quite sure how to go about this. So this should be useful for composers struggling to find chords, harmony that fit with the melody they've written, but also to keyboard players who maybe have this task in front of them of, here's a melody, can you put some chords in it? Can you harmonize it? Put some kind of piano accompaniment to it. So I've got three examples. Let's start by having a look at this one at the top. And it's in the key of G major. Now, if keys sort of confuse you, well, the circle of fifths is the place to be. It tells you exactly which keys use which sharps, which flats. The whole information is there. So if you want to refer to our resources on the circle of fifths, that will explain all of that to you. I'm assuming that we know what G major is, but just to remind you, the scale of G major goes G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, because every major scale goes tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. Tone is a whole step, semitone is a half step, if you've learnt that by that method. So when we start on G and we follow that pattern, we end up with an F sharp. To make the chords, we take every note of the scale in turn and we put a third and a fifth above it. So that's chord 1, chord 2, chord 3, chord 4, chord 5, chord 6, chord 7, and then we come back to chord 1. Notice every time F comes up, I'm using F sharp because in the key of G major, we have an F sharp. The primary chords are chords 1, 4, 5. So chord 1, G, B, D, chord 4, C, E, G, and chord 5, D, F sharp, A. Those are the primary chords in the key of G major. Now, if you're used to reading a lead sheet, you'll know those as a chord of G, a chord of C, and a chord of D. Now, what I've got here is a melody that goes like this. So a fairly straightforward melody. I'm not trying to do anything here that's over fancy. If we're going to restrict ourselves to the primary chords, well, we've got to decide for every single note of that melody, does chord 1 fit, does chord 4 fit, or does chord 5 fit? Sometimes you'll find, oh, actually it could be chord 1 or it could be chord 5 because chord 1 has a D in it, chord 5 also has a D in it. So you might think, oh, I've got a bit of a choice there. Sometimes you might think, the only thing is if I change on every single note, then the chords are going to move very quickly. So we have a fast, what we call a harmonic rhythm. So it's perfectly possible when you're putting chords to a melody that you can treat some notes in the melody as chord tones or harmony notes, notes that belong to the chord. You can treat other notes as non-chord tones or what we call inessential notes. However, if they are non-chord tones or inessential notes, then there are certain categories. So you could have what we call a passing note. So in other words, if we look at the first bar, the first measure, I've decided to go for a G chord or a chord 1 in G major. So that's G, B and D. And you might be looking at this melody saying, well, G's part of that chord, B's part of that chord. But what about A? A's got nothing to do with the G, B, D chord. Absolutely right. However, A is a passing note or a passing tone because it passes by step between the notes either side of it. So if you've got three notes in a line next door to each other, the first and the third are chord tones or harmony notes. The second one, the one in the middle, can simply be a passing note, a passing tone. Okay, so that's what a passing note is, or a passing tone. If we jump to the next exercise for a moment, I'll tell you that that belongs to the chord, this belongs to the chord, this note doesn't. But this note is what we call a lower auxiliary note, or a lower neighbour tone. Gosh, it sounds complicated, but it isn't. This note belongs to the chord, this note belongs to the chord. So I've got two notes the same, and all I've done between is to go down one or to go up one. So I have a note that belongs to the chord, I go down one, I come back to the note that belongs to the chord. Or I've got a note that belongs to the chord, I go up one, I come back to that note that belongs to the chord. That's a neighbour tone or an auxiliary note. So you can have notes that belong to the chords, those harmony notes or chord tones, or you can have these non-chord tones or inessential notes that are passing notes, passing tones, or auxiliary notes, neighbour tones, and you can go a long way on that. So when we have a look through this first melody that I played to you a moment ago, I've chosen chords that fit with the melody, and every now and again we might have one of these passing tones, these passing notes, or one of these auxiliary notes, these neighbour tones. So you can see what I've done in the first measure, the first bar. I've used chord 1, G, B, D, or a G chord, because G fits it, A is passing, B fits it. But then when I come to the next bar, the next measure, I'm looking for a chord that's got C in it. Well, there's no C in chord 1, there's no C in chord 5. Is there a C in chord 4? Thankfully there is. So I've gone for chord 4, or a chord of C. Then I've looked at the next measure, and I thought I've now got A, D, C. Okay, well, A and D both belong to chord 5, the D chord, D, F sharp, A. So that's a good choice. When I come to the C, it's passing on to the next note B, so it's just a passing note or a passing tone. If you know about seventh chords, it happens to turn chord 5 into 5/7, so that's quite a useful one. Then I've looked at the next bar and I thought, well, I've got B for the duration of this one. B, well, belongs to chord 1. It's not in chord 4. It's not in chord 5. So really, let's go for 1. Then I've got B again. So no harm in sticking with the chord 1. That's fine. Then I've got C. Well, that belongs to chord 4. And then I've got A. That belongs nicely to chord 5. And I'm finishing on G. That belongs to chord 1. So actually, if I harmonise using those chords, I've got it cracked. Now, I could just do the kind of basic chords, basic triads. So that sort of fits, doesn't it? It doesn't sound great, does it? Because I've got these chords in the left hand that are kind of thick and grumpy things. And sometimes it's better to have one note in the bass and put 3 notes in the right hand if you're doing this at the keyboard. It spaces things out a bit and you don't get all these notes low that are close together, because they do sound very thick and grumpy, and the melody then sounds kind of dislocated from it. So if I put 3 notes in the right hand and 1 in the bass, it sounds a lot better. So that's a vast improvement, isn't it? Now, if you want to do something more fancy than that, of course you can kind of arpeggiate the accompaniment. Suddenly it sounds very different, doesn't it? You can put some kind of funky rhythm in there, turn it into a different style. So that's how you kind of embellish it. But what I'm suggesting here is that often it's possible to harmonise a melody using very basic primary chords. Lots of songs out there do little more than use the primary chord. So don't think, oh, I've got to do something cleverer than that. It's great if you can, and you can use a bit more colour. But actually, if you just stick to these primary chords, it's amazing how far you can go. So you see what I've done? Chord 1, 4, 5, 1, 1, 4, 5, 1. Or to put it in lead sheet terms, G, C, D, G, G, C, D, G. Okay, that's how the first example works. Let's move on to the second example. I'm doing exactly the same thing, but having done it in a major key, I've now got two examples in minor keys. Minor keys can just be a slight pain, but no need to be frightened of them. If I'm in a minor key and I've got one flat, the circular fifth tells us I'm in the key of D minor. So D minor has got the B flat from the key signature, and then we quite often raise the seventh note in a minor scale. This is called the harmonic minor scale when we do that. And when we're writing harmony, when we're writing chords or improvising chords, we're often working in the harmonic minor scale. Okay, we might sometimes use the melodic minor scale, we might sometimes use the natural minor, but a lot of harmony is using the harmonic minor scale. That's why it's called the harmonic minor scale. It's about harmony. So this is doing exactly the same thing. When you look through this, I'm still using chords 1, 4 and 5, or translating that into the key of D minor. Chord 1 is D, F, A. Chord 4 is G, B flat, D. And chord 5 is A, C sharp, E. You just have to remember about that C sharp because it's the seventh degree of the scale that's being raised. Okay, here's the melody of the second example. Okay, right, it doesn't really matter what that melody is, but it's just to show you how you can do this. Now, this time, life's a bit more involved. We've got some quavers or eighth notes. But what's going on? We talked about this lower auxiliary note or lower neighbour tone. That's a passing note or a passing tone. That's a passing note or a passing tone. Here, we've got one chord, two notes, but chord 5 or the A chord, A major chord, is A, C sharp, E. The melody is going from one note of that chord to another note of the chord. So I can have the same chord for those two notes, not a problem there. In the same way that I've got all of these notes here and all I've got is one chord, a chord 4 or a G minor chord. That belongs to the chord, that's passing. Belongs to the chord, passing. Belongs to the chord, belongs to the chord. So it's either belongs to the chord or it's one of these inessential notes, non-chord tones. So I've looked through this and I thought, well, chord 1 fits the beginning with this lower neighbour tone or lower auxiliary note. Chord 4, chord 1, chord 5, remembering to use the C sharp, chord 1, then chord 4, then chord 5, chord 1, or in lead sheet terms, D minor, G minor, D minor, A major, D minor, G minor, and then A major and D minor. But exactly the same principles apply as they did in our first example in G major. I just wanted to think that out in a minor key. Okay, let's move on to our third example. Another one in a minor key. This time we've got two sharps. So the minor key that has two sharps, the circular fifth tells you, is B minor. Okay, so B minor. So if I start on B and I use the F sharp and the C sharp, but then I also raise the seventh note by a semitone or a half step, I get B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G, A sharp, B. So F sharp and C sharp are in the key signature. A sharp is not in the key signature, but when we're writing a harmonic minor scale, we raise the seventh note. Okay, so that's the distinctive feature of these minor scales. What I've done here is to include something in the melody that uses the melodic minor. Because of course, if the harmonic minor is designed for harmony, The melodic minor is designed for melody. And if you use the harmonic minor when you're writing a melody and you're traveling around the top of the scale, you get this very funny interval between G and A sharp in B minor. This sort of snake charming stuff that goes on at the top. Oh, there's a cobra around the back. No. But that's what you get. So if you want that kind of flavour, that's great. If you don't want that kind of flavour, well, use the melodic minor. What do we do in the melodic minor? We use the key signature, in this case, F sharp and C sharp. Then we raise number 6 going up, so G becomes G sharp. We raise number 7, so A becomes A sharp. We get to B at the top. Then when we come down, we go A natural, G natural, and then follow the key signature, F sharp, E, D, C sharp, B. So we come down in the same way as the natural minor, but we go up, raising 6 and 7. So the G sharp, A sharp thing here in the melody is to avoid that little snake charmer touch. So you've got to think, okay, I've just got to bear that in mind, but it doesn't over affect the chords unless you end up using a chord that's sort of got a clash of interest, and then you've got to think, am I better to change the melody, change the chord? What do I do with this? What do I mean by that? Well, if I was using a chord 4 in B minor, it would be E, G, B. Now, if you've got G sharp in the melody clashing with G natural in the chord, you'd have to think, oh, I don't want that. You may decide to change the chord and have a G sharp in the chord, or you may decide to keep the chord and change the melody to a G natural. Either way, there's just a little room for compromise there. Okay, so I'm looking at primary chords in B minor. So chord 1 is B, D, F sharp. Chord 4, E, G, B. Chord 5, F sharp, A sharp, C sharp. So I've got all sharps in chord 5 there, haven't I? So I'm now looking at this melody thinking, okay, well, in the first bar, the first measure, all of these notes belong to chord 1. They're all B's or D's or F sharps, so I can have a chord 1 there. When I look at the second bar, the second measure, C sharps, they belong to chord 5, or the F sharp major chord, and this is an example of an upper auxiliary note or an upper neighbour tone. It's got C sharp, we're going up 1 to D, we're coming back to C sharp. That's what's going on there. So that's why I can use a chord 5 or an F sharp chord. Then here, well, chord 1 fits that B quite nicely, so that's okay. E fits with chord 4, as does this E, and this note is an upper auxiliary note, an upper neighbour tone. These two notes both belong to chord 1, so that's going to fit nicely. This F sharp and this A sharp belong to chord 5, so that's why I've used that there. This G sharp that we've spoken about is a passing note or a passing tone. It's just going by step in a rising pattern of 3 notes next door to each other there. And then we finish off on B, which belongs to chord 1. And it kind of makes sense to finish on chord 1 at the end of your piece of music, because that's kind of helping you to say, yep, we're in the key of B minor. So how does that sound? Well, I can have chord 1, 5, 1. 4, 1, 5, 1. Or in lead sheet terms, B minor, F sharp, B minor, E minor, B minor, F sharp, B minor. So you can hear that it all works perfectly well because we're spelling out chords that belong to the melody, or we're deciding where these inessential notes come in the melody and whether they sit comfortably with the chord. It helps us to decide which chord to use, helps us to decide when to change the chords. You don't have to change the chord every time the melody moves to another note, because that can sound a bit kind of manic. At the same time, you can't end up with sort of odd notes in the melody that don't sit comfortably with the chord. So it's kind of making those two things fit together. And again, you could do something more florid if you wanted to do. There's one possibility. But that's kind of like when you've got your chords sorted and then you think, what am I going to do to make that sound more interesting musically? So there we are. How to use kind of primary chords only, 1, 4 and 5, locate those in the key that you're in, how then to think about what you've got in a melody and what's a harmony note, a chord tone, what's an inessential note, a non-chord tone, how frequently do I change the chords, and work out how to do that so that you could write some chords, some harmony for a melody, or you could improvise some kind of accompaniment to a given melodic line. Well, if you found this video helpful, let me invite you to take a tour of the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. On the site, we've got a vast array of material for you, all to help the cause. If you click on courses, you'll find lots of stuff there on theory. If you're sort of thinking, yeah, I just need to understand a bit more about keys and chords and how all this stuff kind of works, well, that could be useful to you. If you're thinking, actually, I need to do much more of this sort of harmony under my fingers, getting used to the kind of thing that we've talked about in this video, but how to develop that further and become really good at it, well, have a look at our keyboard harmony course. It's a really extensive course. It's very practical. It's teaching you about harmony, but it's teaching you how to do it under your fingers. It will really empower your use of harmony as a composer, as a player, as an improviser. So there's one particular course that you might think, oh yeah, I could do with really looking at that. But lots of other stuff out there as well. So do have a look and see what's for you. www.mmcourses.co.uk